In the winter of 1841, two stagecoach drivers guided their team through a desolate expanse of northern English countryside. The route stretched before them, familiar yet somehow altered that night. The landscape appeared wounded. Darkened farmhouses stood empty against the horizon. Peculiar charred patches scarred the frozen earth, and an acrid, burned odor drifted upon the bitter wind. The horses detected it first, their nostrils flaring with ancient instinct. Then, without warning, twin points of crimson light materialized upon the road ahead. From that precise moment, every aspect of their journey descended into something far beyond the realm of ordinary experience. So, before we continue, please make sure to subscribe and let us know where you're watching from. Thanks! I first encountered the term Hellhound during the autumn months of 1841, though at that time it remained merely another yarn spun over weak ale and cold mutton stew in drafty coaching inns. Coachmen perpetuate stories much as clergymen recite scripture, some through sheer habit, most to steady their own nerves before facing the dark roads ahead. By that year, I had been driving the Northern Mail route for 3 complete seasons, traveling from York down through the Yorkshire Dales and across into those shadowed lanes that carved their way through the ancient landed estates. The stretch I knew most intimately was the passage through Blackthorn Vale, a section of road that most drivers attempted to exchange for alternative routes whenever possible. I never made such requests. The wages were necessary, and I had grown accustomed to the prolonged silences between the crest of one moorland rise and the descent into the next valley. For souls occupied the coach on the night, everything changed irrevocably. I held the reins from my position on the box. Seated beside me was Tom Barlow, my senior by some 20 years, broad across the shoulders with a faded red scarf wrapped about his neck and a weathered cap pulled low over his furrowed brow. He had driven through every conceivable condition the English climate could conjure, and he claimed the ability to detect an approaching snowstorm a full day before the first flake descended. Behind us, perched upon the narrow iron step at the rear, rode Harris, our guard, equipped with his brass coaching horn and a well-maintained musket. Within the coach itself, we carried but 2 passengers, a linen merchant traveling from Leeds, and a young woman shrouded in a dark traveling cloak who spoke sparingly and observed the passing landscape through the grimy window glass with an intensity that seemed somehow unnatural. The season had turned prematurely that particular year. By the time we departed from the posting house at Thistlebridge, the wind had already begun to slice through my heavy greatcoat, and the first delicate frost lay crystallized along the edges of the stone water troughs in the stable yard. Our horses stamped restlessly and tossed their heads as we harnessed them for the journey ahead. 4 grays, typically powerful and reliable creatures, well bred for the demanding work of the mail coach. Yet that evening they refused to stand calmly. The ostler swore vehemently that nothing ailed them, insisting he had examined each animal thoroughly. Nevertheless, the beasts rolled their eyes white with fear and drew back instinctively from the road as though some invisible presence waited there beyond the lamplight. Their breath rose in pale clouds that hung motionless in the frigid air. An unusual stench permeated the stable yard, a bitter, chemical odor that originated from no recognizable source, such as horse sweat, oiled leather, or damp timber. Tom spat deliberately over the side of the yard wall and studied the eastern horizon with narrowed eyes. "Too dark for this hour of evening," he muttered, his voice carrying a note of unease I had rarely detected before. "The moon exists somewhere beyond those clouds, but they've consumed it entirely." He turned his weathered face towards me. "Are you certain about traveling through the Vale tonight, John? We could petition to exchange for the western route instead. We're carrying His Majesty's mail." I replied firmly, though my own doubts gnawed at my confidence. "The postal authorities will not countenance delays for uncertain weather. The postmaster has already lodged complaints regarding tardiness from the previous week. We proceed as scheduled, or we commence searching for alternative employment." Harris examined the priming of his musket with practiced efficiency and offered a slight shrug of his shoulders. "I have ridden this particular route for a decade," he stated matter-of-factly. Highway robbers have grown considerably less bold in recent years, and I have encountered nothing more troublesome than a lame horse in that valley. He paused momentarily, then added with deliberate emphasis, "Nevertheless, the innkeeper appeared remarkably eager to witness our departure. Excessively eager, one might observe. Did either of you gentlemen notice his demeanor?" I had indeed. Old Carter had rushed through our evening meal and kept casting anxious glances towards the heavy oak door whenever the wind pressed insistently against it. When I settled our account, he had leaned uncomfortably close across the bar and confided that an entire flock of sheep had vanished from the pasture near Blackthorn Village over 3 consecutive nights. "No tracks whatsoever," he had whispered urgently. "No blood, no wool, nothing. The farmers discovered only blackened patches upon the grass that crumbled to ash at the slightest touch." He had lowered his voice to barely above a whisper when recounting this tale, and his eyes had darted nervously towards the other patrons in the taproom, as though the very story itself might offend their sensibilities or invite some terrible attention. I had dismissed his account with forced laughter at the time, but the disturbing image lingered persistently in my thoughts as we rolled out through the posting yard gates and onto the darkened road beyond. The initial miles passed in the familiar, almost hypnotic rhythm of iron-shod wheels upon compacted earth and the steady percussion of 16 hooves. The road from Thistlebridge towards the valley mouth ran between low dry stone walls slick with moss and winter damp. Thin, skeletal hedges rose behind them, stripped bare by the advancing season. Lamps glowed warmly in a scattered few distant farmhouses, then vanished progressively as we climbed higher into the moorland. I maintained my focus upon the pale ribbon of road, where it carved through the encompassing darkness. The sky held no stars whatsoever, only an oppressive ceiling of cloud. Tom sat hunched beside me, his gloved hands tucked deep into his armpits for warmth, his breath forming damp clouds that dissipated slowly in the still air. After considerable silence, he broke the quiet contemplation. "Carter's father swore upon his life that he witnessed a black dog upon this very route when he was a young man," he said quietly. "Not an ordinary farm dog, mind you. He claimed it walked with such substantial weight that the ground itself trembled beneath its paws. He insisted it observed the passing coach from the hillside, and that its eyes burned like forged coals in the darkness. He refused absolutely to drive this way after nightfall thereafter, would only accept the route at dawn, and then only with a fully laden coach and 2 armed guards in attendance. Men's memories transform considerably as they age," I replied, attempting to inject confidence in my voice. My own grandfather perceived omens and portents in every alteration of weather pattern. Every broken branch carried significance and meaning. I endeavored to sound relaxed and dismissive, but the memory of the horses stamping anxiously in the stable yard persisted uneasily in my consciousness. Tom shook his head slowly. "I have encountered the identical account from numerous other drivers over the years," he insisted. "They maintain it keeps to the older roads exclusively, the ancient tracks that existed before the Turnpike Trust laid their milestone stones, where the very earth remembers other feet from darker ages. The roads our ancestors traveled." He shifted uncomfortably upon the narrow seat. "They call it a hellhound in these modern times, but that particular designation is relatively recent. The creature itself is considerably older than any Christian name we might apply to it." The coach lurched violently as the wheels struck a concealed rut in the deteriorating surface. The merchant inside swore audibly in irritation, and the young woman released a soft exclamation of alarm. I called an apology through the small communication flap in the roof, then concentrated my attention once more upon maintaining our course. The horses had settled into a reasonable pace, yet their ears continued to flick forward and backward nervously. On one occasion, the lead mare jerked her head sharply to the side, as though some invisible presence had brushed against her sensitive muzzle. I perceived nothing whatsoever beyond the limited circle illuminated by our swaying coach lamps. The first genuinely peculiar occurrence we observed manifested approximately an hour into our journey. As we approached the summit of the rise before descending into Blackthorn Vale proper, an unusual pale luminescence flickered intermittently along the roadside ahead of us. Initially, I assumed it to be a lantern carried by some late traveler. The road curved sharply, and momentarily the mysterious light disappeared behind the dense hedge, only to reappear once more as our perspective shifted. Crucially, it did not swing and sway as a hand-carried lantern would inevitably do. Instead, it maintained a steady, fixed position close to the ground itself. The atmospheric odor altered noticeably. The earlier bitter note intensified considerably, now mingled with an unmistakable hint of something burned. Not wholesome with smoke, but something far more unsettling and chemical in nature. Harris rapped sharply upon the coach roof with the butt of his musket. "Do you gentlemen detect that odor?" he called out urgently. "That is most definitely not wood smoke from any honest hearth fire. I smell it distinctly," I answered, my tongue feeling peculiarly dry within my mouth. "We shall ascertain the cause shortly enough when we crest this rise." We surmounted the final slope, and Blackthorn Vale spread before us, a dark, hollow depression lined with skeletal trees and dull, lifeless fields stretching away into the gloom. The mysterious light we had observed was not, as anticipated, a lantern at all. Instead, a substantial patch of earth lay beside the road, larger in diameter than a man's full height, exhibiting a dull reddish glow at its outer edges whilst the center remained utterly black. It did not shine like a living ember or coal. It possessed no visible movement or flickering. Yet it glowed with a faint, sickly luminescence in the encompassing darkness, sufficient illumination that I could clearly perceive how the surrounding grass terminated in an unnaturally sharp, defined line around its perimeter. The individual blades nearest the edge had curled inward upon themselves, dried and brittle as ancient parchment. Tom swore vehemently under his breath. That particular patch was absolutely not present 3 nights past, he stated with absolute certainty. I traveled through here alongside Fuller on Tuesday last. The field appeared entirely normal at that time. I slowed the team considerably and steered the coach as far towards the opposite side of the narrow road as I dared safely navigate. The animals snorted anxiously and attempted to shy violently away from the strange phenomenon, their iron-shod hooves clattering chaotically upon stones. As we drew level with the glowing patch, the nauseating smell intensified dramatically, so harsh and acrid that it brought involuntary tears to my eyes. This was categorically not the scent of any normal, wholesome fire. It carried an underlying sourness, a corruption that settled low and heavy in one's throat and chest. The young woman inside knocked insistently upon the roof. "Is something burning out there?" she called, her voice remarkably composed despite the circumstances. I can perceive a strange glow through the window glass. "Only a peculiar patch of ground, miss," Tom answered, though his voice betrayed the strain he attempted to conceal. "Nothing to cause you undue concern. Most likely a farmer's rubbish fire that has burned itself low." His words utterly failed to match his tone. The anxiety would have been transparently obvious even to someone unfamiliar with reading the subtle inflections of a coachman's voice. Once we had passed beyond the immediate vicinity of the glowing patch, the horses eased slightly in their evident distress, though the corrupted air did not clear immediately. The acrid stench clung tenaciously to our clothing and the coach itself, only gradually thinning as we progressed. I found myself recalling Carter's account of the missing sheep and the blackened patches he had described with such evident fear. I had initially imagined some form of damp mold or livestock disease. This phenomenon was something altogether different and far more disturbing. I maintained my grip upon the reins with considerable tension, my knuckles stiffening inside my leather gloves despite their thickness. For an extended period, none of us ventured to speak. Only the rumble of iron-rimmed wheels upon earth and the occasional metallic rattle of harness fittings filled the oppressive night. The road descended more steeply into the vale proper. Ancient trees rose close upon either side, their bare branches meeting overhead to form a kind of natural tunnel. Our coach lamps threw short, concentrated beams of yellow light that died abruptly only a few yards ahead of our position. On two separate occasions, I became convinced I perceived movement at the very edge of that illuminated circle, but each time it resolved itself into merely a branch shifting sluggishly under the wind's influence. "It is considerably quieter than it ought to be at this hour," Harris observed softly from his position behind us. "No owls calling, no foxes barking in the distance. Even the sheep fields maintain an unnatural silence." I listened intently, and he was undeniably correct in his assessment. The customary small sounds of the English countryside at night had vanished entirely. Only the wind moved through the skeletal trees, and even it seemed somehow muted and held back, as though the very air refused to move naturally. The stillness pressed insistently upon my ears until my own measured breathing sounded unnaturally loud and labored. A thin film of cold sweat began to form beneath my cap, despite the biting temperature. I attempted to reassure myself that I was being foolishly superstitious, that the glowing patch possessed some mundane explanation. Perhaps some workman's caustic chemical spill, or perhaps a burning cart abandoned and left to smolder in the ditch. Yet my thoughts kept circling relentlessly back to the manner in which the grass had terminated in that impossibly sharp line, and the way the horses had instinctively attempted to pull away with such desperate force. I had witnessed them balk at rushing streams, unfamiliar scents, and moving shadows on countless previous occasions, but I had never before experienced their raw fear transmitted so directly through the leather reins into my very hands. We passed a small, weathered milestone half buried at the edge of the drainage ditch. The carved numbers had eroded significantly, but I knew them already from countless previous journeys. 2 miles remaining to Blackthorn Bridge, 1 mile beyond that to the junction where the road divided between the main highway and the older, narrower track that curved along the hillside. We invariably selected the older track when carrying the Royal Mail. It eliminated considerable time from our schedule, and the main road was notorious for sinking into treacherous mud during wet weather. I contemplated that approaching fork now and felt an inexplicable tightness manifest in my chest, an uncomfortable constriction that bore no relation whatsoever to the frigid temperature. I cleared my throat deliberately. When we reached the junction, I proposed carefully we might consider remaining upon the main highway instead. We would sacrifice some minutes from our schedule, but the ground surface should still maintain sufficient integrity for the wheels. It has not rained for several days past. Tom rotated his head slowly to regard me, his weathered features partially illuminated by the nearest coach lamp. "You have always despised that particular road," he stated flatly. "You complain incessantly about the ruts and the poor drainage. What precisely has altered your perspective this evening?" "You witnessed that glowing patch as clearly as I did," I answered defensively, "and you are perfectly aware the horses detected something profoundly wrong there. I would far rather contend with mud and difficult terrain than whatever phenomenon caused the grass to terminate in that unnatural manner." Harris shifted position behind us, the metal butt of his musket clicking softly against the iron safety rail. "I possess no objection whatsoever to selecting a longer route," he contributed thoughtfully, "provided we reach the next coaching station with the mail bags intact and undamaged. The postal authorities care considerably more about that than the precise hour of our arrival." Before we could reach any firm conclusion, the roof communication flap lifted abruptly and the merchant's pale face appeared, creased deeply with both annoyance and growing anxiety. "What is this absurd discussion of altering the established route?" he demanded irritably. "I have urgent business awaiting me in Durham tomorrow morning. I paid substantial money for passage on the fastest available line. I absolutely will not tolerate crawling through half the county simply because you coachmen observe some peculiar soil. The horses are demonstrably unsettled, sir," I explained with forced patience, "and Blackthorn Hill possesses its own well-documented difficulties. The old track is exceedingly narrow in places. Should something ahead cause the team to panic severely, we would have precious little room to manage them safely." He snorted derisively. You coachmen breed unnecessary fear amongst yourselves like contagion, he declared dismissively. Every valley and hollow holds imaginary phantoms in your superstitious minds. I will not arrive late for my appointments because of groundless superstition. Take the usual, established road. That is precisely what I paid my fare to receive. The young woman's head appeared beside his for a brief moment. Her intelligent eyes moved deliberately from my face to Tom's weathered features, then to the darkness gathering behind us. If the driver believes another route offers greater safety, she stated quietly but firmly, I perceive absolutely no reason to argue the matter. The difference of an hour will not ruin anyone's prospects. The merchant drew back as though she had touched upon some painful subject. You may waste your own time if you so desire, he snapped at her. Mine is not so easily replaced or squandered. He dropped the communication flap abruptly without awaiting any response. Harris released a short, humorless laugh. There you have it, gentlemen, he observed wryly. Profit and punctuality over prudence and peace of mind. Tom stared fixedly ahead into the darkness. We are not mere lackeys subject to one impatient man's commercial demands, he stated firmly. You hold the reins, John. You will answer for whatever choice you make at the next station, not him. Decide what you can live with and what you can justify to the company directors. The weight of that responsibility settled heavily in my chest like a stone. I contemplated the glowing patch we had passed, the corrupted smell that still lingered faintly in my nostrils, the oppressively silent field surrounding us. I also contemplated the postmaster's thin, disapproving mouth and the manner in which he composed detailed letters to the coaching company regarding any delay, however minor. I imagined myself dismissed from the line entirely, reduced to searching desperately for employment on lesser routes with inferior wages. For a prolonged moment, my thoughts moved uncertainly between these competing considerations. Then the decision formed itself, plain and solid. When we reached the junction, I announced, we shall judge the condition of the main road with our own eyes. If it appears firm and passable, we select it. If it is already deteriorating in a mire, we maintain the usual track as scheduled. That represents the best compromise I can offer under these circumstances. Tom grunted his acknowledgement. Fair enough, he conceded, though I will state this plainly. I have never previously witnessed horses pull so violently against a particular stretch of road, then eventually settle again. Whatever they detected back there near that glowing patch, they have most certainly not forgotten it. We proceeded onward through the encompassing darkness. The trees grew progressively closer, their lower branches hanging lower still. A broken gate appeared suddenly on the right side, its boards blackened severely, not by natural age or rot, but by something altogether different. The wood had cracked and curled as though subjected to intense heat, yet no ash whatsoever lay upon the ground beneath it. I could clearly perceive where old paint had blistered and peeled. The hinge iron possessed a faint, dull sheen, as if it had cooled from extreme temperature not long previously. Observe there, Tom said under his breath, his voice tight. I see it clearly, I replied quietly, maintaining our pace. I deliberately did not slow our speed. I possessed no desire whatsoever for the horses to linger anywhere near that disturbing sight. Nevertheless, I could not prevent my eyes from following the line of the broken, burned gate into the dark field beyond. Near the approximate center of that field lay a substantial shape. Our coach lamps only grazed it momentarily as we passed, but in that brief interval, I observed sufficient detail. The outline suggested a large animal, perhaps a cow or young bull. The body did not rise and fall with respiration. The surrounding ground appeared considerably darker than the rest of the field. I could not be entirely certain in the poor light, yet the sight joined the accumulating catalog of disturbing details in my increasingly troubled thoughts. The young woman's voice drifted from inside the coach. Did you observe that shape in the field? She asked quietly. Tom called back without turning his head. Observe something in the field, miss. Best not to dwell upon it. We shall report it to the authorities at the next coaching station. She did not respond further. For several breaths, Even the merchant maintained uncharacteristic silence. We reached a section where the trees opened slightly, providing marginally improved visibility. A low stone wall marked the edge of the road, beyond which the land rose in a gradual slope. Short, dense scrub covered it thickly, dark and tangled in the winter dormancy. I kept my primary attention upon the road ahead, yet some inexplicable impulse caused me to glance upward towards the slope as we passed a gap in the stone wall. 2 points of crimson light hung there in the darkness, positioned at a height too low for any man and too elevated for any normal farm dog. They did not flicker or waver. They did not move at all. They simply watched the road below with terrible, patient intensity. My throat constricted involuntarily. The horses perceived it instantaneously. All 4 animals jerked their heads violently and pulled against the harness with sudden, overwhelming panic. The lead mare attempted desperately to veer towards the left-hand ditch. I hauled upon the reins with all my strength and spoke to them urgently. Words of habit and long practice that had calmed them through thunderstorms and near collisions with carts. This time they responded far more slowly than ever before. Their powerful muscles trembled perceptibly beneath the leather harness. Tom followed my gaze upward toward the slope. His entire body went rigid beside me on the narrow box seat. For an extended moment, we both stared transfixed at those unwavering red points of light. Then a cloud of darker shadow seemed to fold deliberately over them, swallowing them completely from view. There was nothing visible upon the slope but scrub and scattered stone. "Tell me you witnessed that," Tom whispered urgently, his voice barely audible. I witnessed it clearly. I confirmed, the words emerging low and constricted from my tight throat. My heart hammered in my chest with such force that I could feel the pulse throbbing in my neck. "Do not speak of it yet. Harris will insist we turn back immediately if he learns of this." Harris, having heard his name mentioned, leaned forward from his rear position. "What now?" he demanded. "Another peculiar patch? Something else?" "Nothing whatsoever," I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. "Only a trick of the lamplight upon the rocks. Keep vigilant watch behind us. I shall manage the road ahead." He did not sound remotely convinced, but he offered no further comment. I focused all my attention upon calming the horses gradually. After some considerable time, their gait steadied somewhat, though their ears remained pricked rigidly forward in continued alertness. The leather reins still carried a faint tremor transmitted from their bodies. My mind worked frantically over what I had witnessed with my own eyes. 2 distinct red points suspended in complete darkness. No outline whatsoever around them. No lantern frame. No rider astride a horse. Only that fixed, steady, predatory gaze directed specifically at us. I attempted desperately to shape it into some earthly, rational cause. Perhaps a reflection from some hidden cottage window. Perhaps a prank perpetrated by some mischievous farm boy equipped with a pair of polished glass beads. Each attempted explanation fell away as utterly inadequate as soon as I considered it properly. There had been an unmistakable quality to that gaze, a directness and intelligence that I had felt in my chest as much as I'd seen with my eyes. We were approaching the junction now. I recognized the tall elm tree on the right side, stripped of most of its leaves by the advancing season, and a shallow depression in the road where water habitually gathered during spring rains. The air grew noticeably colder as we descended the gentle slope. Our coach lamps picked up the first glimmer of the main road running crosswise ahead of our position. "Moment of truth approaching," Tom murmured quietly. The junction came into full view before us. The main road extended to the left, noticeably wider, its surface uneven but not yet drowned in treacherous mud. The old track, the one that climbed steadily towards Blackthorn Hill, forked sharply to the right, considerably narrower, bounded by tall hedges that formed a kind of natural corridor. Approximately 1 mile along that particular track stood the old boundary stone, and beyond that, a line of far older markers that few living souls could decipher now. The sight of that right-hand road brought an inexplicable dull ache into my chest that I could not rationally explain or justify. I drew the team to a slow trot, then to a complete walk as we approached the decision point. My hands tightened instinctively upon the reins. I could feel Tom's weathered eyes upon me intently, and I knew Harris watched expectantly through the rear. From inside the coach came the rustle of clothing as both passengers shifted position. I steered the team deliberately towards the main road. The decision settled upon me with a strange combination of relief and persistent unease operating simultaneously. "We select the left," I announced clearly. "The ground surface appears firm enough for our purposes. We gain distance from whatever phenomenon is occurring along the hillside." Tom released a slow, measured breath. "I will not argue with that decision," he stated simply. The merchant pushed up the communication flap once again. His expression displayed both evident satisfaction and lingering irritation, as if he had anticipated a prolonged quarrel and now, somehow, missed the opportunity. "About time you showed some sense," he declared. "This is the proper, established way. No more absurd talk of unnecessary detours." The young woman watched me intently, but said nothing whatsoever. There was something remarkably steady in her gaze, an unusual composure. For a brief second, our eyes met directly. I felt an odd, inexplicable sense that she understood considerably more than she was saying aloud. We turned onto the main road. The wheels struck several shallow ruts, but the surface held adequately. The land opened somewhat on this side of the junction. Low fields stretched away into the darkness, broken by the occasional copse and a few clusters of standing stones. A long, low building stood in the distance to our right, its roof sagging noticeably, windows utterly dark, an abandoned barn, most likely. It had always been there during previous journeys, but I had rarely given it a second thought. Tonight, it drew my unwilling attention with magnetic force. As we drew nearer, I observed that the stones around its perimeter bore disturbing dark marks. Not the natural stains of damp and weathering, but irregular shapes that spread outward from the base. The pattern reminded me uncomfortably of the glowing patch we had passed earlier, though here the effect had climbed the walls as well. The door hung at a crooked angle, the lower half severely blackened. No light, no sound, no sign whatsoever of recent habitation or work. Harris drew a long, deliberate breath behind us. "I know that particular barn," he said quietly. "Old Rowley's place. He used to store hay there for winter feed. His son drove for a considerable period on the Southern Mail Line. I have not seen Rowley at the coaching inns this entire season." Tom watched the building intently as we rolled past. "If that damage resulted from fire," he observed thoughtfully, "it is a remarkably strange variety. The thatch roof should have ignited first, yet the roof structure still holds intact." We left the abandoned barn behind us. For a brief time, the road ran reasonably straight and level. The horses settled into a steady, sustainable pace, though they continued to snort far more frequently than usual. I attempted to allow the regular movement to ease my mounting tension, but the image of the crimson gaze upon the slope and the blackened stones near the barn refused to leave my troubled thoughts. Each new disturbing detail seemed to extend an invisible line leading inexorably forward to something we had not yet encountered. I contemplated turning back then for the first genuinely serious time. The idea manifested in a brief, sharp form. Stop the coach entirely, swing the team around in a complete reversal, and return directly to Thistlebridge with all possible speed. Yet, in the same moment, I knew with absolute certainty I would not do it. We were deep enough into the route that turning back would waste considerably more time than proceeding onward. There existed no guarantee whatsoever that the way behind us was any safer than the way ahead. And there was the duty itself, the weight and responsibility I had accepted each time I took up the reins for His Majesty's mail service. I tightened my grip and kept us moving steadily northward. The next disturbing sign appeared without any warning whatsoever. We had just passed a cluster of leaning milestone stones when the lead mare threw her head up so sharply that the leather reins burned painfully against my palms. All four horses stopped simultaneously and absolutely. Their hooves dug into the road surface, and the coach jolted with such violence that both passengers cried out audibly inside. The animals faced forward but refused categorically to take another single step. Their muscular bodies tensed beneath the harness, as if the very air ahead pressed against them with physical force. Tom leaned slightly forward on the box seat, his experienced eyes narrowing with concern. "What has spooked them now?" he asked, though the answer was already taking visible shape in his tense expression as he scanned the darkness ahead. I lifted the lantern from its iron hook and raised it as high as my arm could extend. The beam shone over the dirt road for only a few yards before it caught something substantial lying directly across our track. At first, I thought it was another dead animal similar to the one in the field, but the shape was fundamentally wrong. It was long and relatively thin, thicker on one end, tapering off in a ragged, irregular line. The horses trembled violently, ears flattened against their skulls, nostrils flared wide. Harris jumped down before I could prevent him. He stepped deliberately into the beam of the lamp, musket held ready. "Remain seated," he commanded. "I'll examine what it is." Tom hissed urgently, "Don't venture too far. Keep to the light." I held the lantern as steady as possible as Harris advanced cautiously. The smell reached us first, sharp and sour simultaneously, the identical scent that had stung our noses near the glowing patch, but considerably stronger now. He crouched beside the object and ran his free hand over the air above it without making direct contact. Then he stood, turned, and walked back towards the coach with tight, controlled steps. "It's a tree limb," he reported when he reached us, "but not cut clean by any saw or axe. It's burned along the edges. No ordinary flame would burn like that. The wood is dry, but not reduced to ash. It looks melted." Tom shook his head in disbelief. "Melted wood? That makes absolutely no sense." Harris climbed back up to the rear step. "Sense or not, it is there. We need to move it. The horses won't go forward with it blocking the track." I handed the reins to Tom, jumped down with the lantern, and walked carefully toward the fallen limb. As I approached, I noticed the ground around it. The earth was dark, as if soaked with liquid. But when I touched it experimentally with the toe of my boot, it crackled like brittle leaves. The heat had reached the soil and hardened it into a thin crust. The limb itself was heavy when I gripped it, though it should not have been for something so dry. The surface was rough and uneven with small holes along its length. The wood felt cold, not warm. Tom joined me. Together, we dragged it to the side of the road. When it fell, it broke at the center with an odd muffled snap, like a rotten beam crushed by weight. No spark, no smoke, just a lingering scent that clung to our clothes. We returned to the coach and climbed back into our places. The horses needed considerable coaxing, but they slowly stepped forward once the road was clear. I studied them carefully, murmuring to them as we resumed our pace. The wheels rolled over the hardened patch with a faint crunching sound. The young woman's voice came from inside. "What caused that?" she asked. "Is it safe to continue?" I answered without opening the flap. "It was only a fallen branch, miss. Burned somehow, but the road is clear now. We will keep a close watch." She grew quiet. The merchant remained silent as well. I wondered what each of them imagined as they sat in the dark coach with only muffled views of the road ahead. For several minutes, we heard only the hoof beats. Then Tom leaned toward me. "These signs, they're not far apart anymore," he said. "It's like following a trail." "I know," I answered. "But a trail of what?" He did not reply. Harris shifted behind us, restless. "We are being followed," he said suddenly. Tom twisted. "What do you mean? You see something?" "No," Harris said. "That's the problem. I feel it. There should be something behind us by now. A rider, a cart, anything. This road is used by more than us." He paused. "But I keep looking back, and there is nothing. No lantern, no voice, only the dark." I resisted the urge to look over my shoulder. It would have made it worse. The land rose gently for a time, then settled again into a shallow dip. As we descended, a faint wind stirred, cold enough to turn my fingers stiff around the reins. The lamps flickered precariously. The horses slowed on their own, as if the cold pushed against their legs with physical resistance. The road curved left around a cluster of tall hedges. As we rounded that bend, the next disturbing sign appeared. A farmhouse stood a short distance from the road. It had not been fully abandoned the last time I passed, though it was old and in evident need of repairs. Tonight it stood utterly silent, its windows dark. The side facing us was scorched severely, not burned by open flame, but marked by irregular streaks of black that reached upward from the base like old wounds. The front door hung by one hinge. Near the entrance lay a bucket, overturned with a dark stain spread beneath it. I slowed the coach. The window shutters, loosened by time, creaked slightly in the wind. No movement inside, no animals, no smoke from the chimney. Tom stared. I knew the Brearleys who lived here, he said. They kept chickens. They stayed to themselves, but were decent enough. The house was plain but clean. This happened fast. Harris's voice came from behind us. If you stop here, I will climb the roof rather than go inside, he said. Keep moving. I reached for the reins, ready to urge the horses forward, when I noticed something I had missed at first. Behind the house, near the fenced area that once held chickens, the ground glowed faintly. A dull red rim, larger than the other patches we had seen. Around it, the fence posts leaned at strange angles, blackened and curled. A section of wire lay twisted. Tom whispered, "That one is fresh." The young woman inside knocked once on the roof. "Driver," she said, "are we stopping?" "No," I answered. "We continue." I guided the horses onward. They needed no encouragement this time. They seemed eager to leave that house behind. As we passed, I kept my eyes ahead, though a part of me expected a shape to appear in one of the windows. We reached a long stretch where no farms remained, only open land and scattered trees. The road narrowed again, branching around a fallen wall that had collapsed sometime in the past year. The stones lay tumbled in the grass. Beyond the wall rose a mound covered in thorn bushes, one of the older burial sites common in the area. I had passed it many times and never thought much of it. Tonight, something stood near it, a tall shape, dark against the ground, not entirely upright. Its outline was rough, as though covered in coarse fur. I slowed the coach. Tom cursed. Harris leaned forward, musket raised, but then a gust of wind pushed through the brush and the shape broke apart. The lantern light caught it fully. It was only a tangle of branches caught on a jutting stone. Nothing alive. It had looked like something else only because our minds were ready for it. "You see how easy it is to imagine," Tom muttered, though he did not sound convinced. We kept going. Then the quiet broke. A sound rolled across the fields, low, heavy, drawn out. Not the call of any dog I had ever heard. It came from the north, off the road, near a cluster of bare trees. The horses stopped at once, even without my pull on the reins. Their breath came fast, visible in the cold air. Tom's hand reached for the brake lever. "What was that?" Harris answered in a harsh whisper. "That was no animal." I sat frozen for a moment. The sound continued, softer now, as if moving. It came again, closer, ending in a rasp that scraped against the quiet. Then the trees ahead shifted. A large shadow passed between them. Not the wind, not a trick of the lanterns. Something moved along the line of the hedges, heavy enough that the branches swayed. I pulled in a tight breath. "We turn back," I said. "Now." "No," the merchant shouted inside. "We go forward." Forward. But his voice meant nothing now. The shadow moved again, closer, unmistakable in size. "We turn back," I repeated. "Hold on." I began to pivot the horses. That was when the first pair of red eyes appeared on the road ahead. The eyes were fixed on us, set low to the ground, but far too wide apart for any common dog. They glowed with a steady brightness that did not flicker. The darkness around them felt dense, as if the air itself thickened to hold their shape. Every hair on my arms rose beneath my coat. The horses went rigid. For a moment, none of us spoke. Then Tom breathed out in a thin, uneven gasp. "It's on the road," he said. "It's standing right on the road." I held the reins tight, unsure if moving would trigger it. My voice came out thin. "Harris, keep the musket ready, but don't fire yet." Harris didn't answer right away. When he finally spoke, his tone was stiff. I can't see its body, only the eyes. The eyes moved, not quickly. They lifted slightly, then lowered as if the thing adjusted its stance. A faint shape emerged in the lantern glow, a heavy outline, broad at the shoulders, the head low, the fur darker than the night around it. Its size was unmistakable. No farm dog grew that large. The creature stood across the width of the road, as if claiming it. The merchant inside pounded the roof. "What is happening? Why have we stopped?" Before I could answer, the young woman spoke. "Something is in our path," she said. Her voice was steady. "If you value your life, do not shout again." The creature stepped forward, one heavy stride. The horses snapped. They reared against the harness and swung to the side, nearly tipping the coach. Tom grabbed the edge of the box to keep from being thrown. I hauled with all my strength on the reins, fighting to hold them steady. Harris steadied himself behind us, boots scraping on the iron step. The thing stopped again. Its breath came out in a slow, heavy sound. Not a growl, not a snarl. Something lower, as if the air vibrated through a wide chest. A faint scorch rose from the ground beneath it, thin wisps drifting upward. I saw the earth at its feet darken in a widening circle. Tom whispered, "It burns where it stands." The creature lowered its head. The red eyes held us with a directness that felt physical, as if something reached across the space and pressed against my thoughts. I felt a pull toward it, an urge to keep staring, though every instinct told me to look away. "John," Harris said quietly, "if it charges, we shoot." "No," I said, "not unless we must. If we fire and miss, it will be on us before we can reload." "So what do we do?" Tom asked, voice strained. "We can't sit here. If the horses bolt, the coach will flip." I forced my mind to steady. "We draw back slowly," I said. "No sudden movements. If it's claiming the road, maybe it only wants us out of its path." "That thing doesn't want anything normal," Tom muttered. Still, he didn't argue. I tightened the reins and coaxed the horses backward. The team resisted at first, legs stiff, muscles shaking. Then they began to step back, inch by inch. The coach creaked with each retreating motion. The creature stood still. Its eyes followed the movement, but its body did not shift. Another step back, another. When we had put several yards between us, the creature moved again. It stepped forward, not toward us, but toward the side of the road. Its body passed through the hedges with a sound like brittle branches breaking. The hedge parted, then sagged behind it. More scorched ground marked its path. "It's letting us go," Tom said. "Or circling us," Harris answered. We kept retreating until the horses reached the bend in the road. The creature disappeared into the trees. I heard the dull crack of wood snapping deeper inside the dark. "We're turning around," I said. "Hold on." The horses didn't need urging this time. The moment I pulled left, they swung hard, nearly lifting the rear wheel from the road. The merchant inside shouted in protest, then fell silent as the coach lurched. Tom braced himself and guided the lantern so it didn't slam into the wheels. We pivoted fully, facing the direction we came from. "Drive," Harris said, "before it returns." I snapped the reins. The team leapt forward, hooves pounding the road in a frantic rhythm. The coach rattled and swayed. Tom clung to the edge of the box. Behind us, Harris kept his musket ready, the barrel pointed backward into the dark. For several minutes, we drove with only the sound of the horses and the scraping of wheels. The wind rose again, carrying the faint scent of scorched earth. Then we heard it, a heavy thud somewhere behind us. Then another, not running, not sprinting, just moving. Each step deliberate, shaking the ground. The horses sensed it instantly. They ran harder, foam forming at their mouths, breaths ragged. "It's following," Tom said. Harris swore. "We stay on the main road," I said. "It's the straightest path back. If we reach open ground, we may outrun it." The road straightened as we left the bend behind. I dared one glance over my shoulder. For a moment, I saw nothing. Then a shape appeared between the hedges, tall enough that its back rose above them. The red eyes gleamed again. The creature broke into a faster stride. I turned forward. "Hold tight." We raced down the road, past the scorched farmhouse, past the twisted fence, past the burned gate. Each landmark seemed sharper than before, as if the creature's presence made every detail stand out. The horses strained but held their pace. The coach rattled so hard I feared an axle would give. The steps behind us grew louder. Tom clutched the side of the box. It's gaining. Not much, but enough. Keep going, Harris shouted. The young woman pounded the roof. Is it behind us? She demanded. Yes, Tom said. Stay inside. The merchant's voice came next, sharp with panic. Driver, don't let it reach us. I did not answer. I cannot spare a breath. We reached the rise before the valley mouth. The horses surged up the slope, lungs heaving, their hooves cracked against the stones. The creature roared. It wasn't a howl. It wasn't anything I had heard from any living thing. It was deep, layered, and heavy enough to make the reins tremble in my hands. The noise filled the air, pressing into our ears and chest like weight. The horses screamed. The coach nearly lifted at the front as they pulled harder than I thought possible. Another roar, then a sharp tearing sound behind us. Something crashing through the hedge. Don't look, Tom shouted. I kept my eyes on the road. We crested the rise. Ahead lay the long, straight stretch toward Thistlebridge. If we reached it, we would have the best chance of outrunning it. The creature hit the road behind us. I felt it through the wheels. The impact rattled the coach and sent a jolt up my arms. It's on the road, Harris yelled. It's right behind us. I snapped the reins again, urging the horses to their limits. The creature roared once more. Then I heard something new. Harris pulling back the musket lock. Don't fire, I shouted. I have to, he shouted back. It's close enough to bite the wheels. No, the musket fired. The sound blasted through the night, echoing across the fields. The horses bucked, but ran on. I didn't dare look back yet. I waited for the roar, the impact, the sound of claws on wood. But the night went still. Only the wheels, the hooves, and the hard breaths of the team filled the air. Then Harris spoke, his voice shaking. Driver, it stopped. Tom twisted, wide-eyed. What do you mean stop? It's not following, Harris said. It's standing in the road, not moving. I risked a look. The creature stood far behind us now, just visible in the lantern's diminishing glow. Its eyes burned through the dark. Its body was still. The road beneath it glowed in a circle. It watched us. Nothing more. We keep going, I said. Don't look back again. We fled toward Thistlebridge. We were less than a mile from the outer farms of Thistlebridge when the horses began to falter. They had given everything they had on the run from the valley, and their strides were turning uneven. I tried not to push them, but each time I eased the reins, they slowed too much. Harris stayed rigid on the rear step, the musket empty but gripped as if he could fire it again through will alone. Tom hung onto the box with one hand and held the lantern forward with the other, his breath sharp in the cold air. The lamps at the roadside finally came into view, small and weak, but a sign that the edge of the village wasn't far. I imagined the stable yards, the posting in, the men who could help if the creature appeared again. The thought steadied me. Then the wind shifted. A familiar odor rolled over us, the same bitter burn scent we had encountered near the scorched patches. It clung to the road and seeped through the air, growing stronger with each step. The horses sensed it before we did. Their heads jerked up, eyes wide. The lead mare slowed to a nervous trot, snorting clouds of white. The rhythm of the coach broke again. Tom held the lantern higher. Not again, he muttered. We reached a small bridge just ahead, a stone crossing, low and narrow, spanning a shallow brook. The lamps along its sides flickered as if the wind pressed against them. The horses balked near the entrance, hooves scraping the stones. What now? Harris demanded. I leaned forward to steady the team. They won't cross. Tom pointed to the left side of the bridge. There, look. I turned the lantern. A section of the stone railing had collapsed. At first, it looked like simple erosion or damage from a fallen cart, but then the light caught the marks. The stones bore the same dark scorch as the farmhouse. The soil near the brook was hardened, cracked, and steaming faintly. Thin wisps rose from it. Not smoke from heat, but something else. Thin, thread-like vapors that moved straight up into the dark as if pulled by an unseen force. The scent intensified. I swallowed. It passed this way. Tom nodded. Not long ago. The horses shuffled anxiously. The mare closest to the bridge refused to move forward, her muscles trembling under the harness. The other three pressed sideways, trying to pull away from the gap in the railing. "We need to cross," Harris said. "There's no other way into Thistlebridge without adding hours." Before I could answer, another sound cut the air. A faint scrape, not from behind us. Ahead, the sound came from under the bridge. The horses reared so violently that the coach jerked forward and slammed back. Tom nearly lost the lantern. Harris steadied himself against the iron rail. Something moved in the shadows beneath the bridge. Slow, deliberate movement against stone. The scrape came again, louder, followed by a low, heavy breath. My heart thudded against my ribs. The creature had not been behind us. It had circled ahead. The young woman knocked twice on the roof, her voice tight. "What do you see?" I didn't answer. My throat had gone dry. The merchant said nothing at all, as if he recognized the danger for the first time. Tom whispered, "It's underneath." The horses refused to go forward, but also refused to turn. They pressed against each other, nearly crushing the pole between them. I tried to calm them, but my voice shook. "Easy, easy." The scraping turned to a thud, a deep sound. Something hitting stone from below. It was moving upward. Harris lifted the musket. It had no powder left. "If it comes up here, we have nothing," he said. The creature struck the underside of the bridge again. The entire structure trembled. Dust fell from the joints in the stone. The horses screamed and kicked out, one of them nearly slipping on the road. Tom grabbed my arm. "Back the coach. Quick!" I jerked the reins and pulled hard. The horses responded at last, stepping backward in uneven, panicked motions. As we retreated several yards, another impact shook the bridge. One stone near the gap cracked clean down the middle. The space beneath the bridge filled with a low rumble. Not a growl. Something heavier, something that seemed to come from deeper in the chest of whatever waited there. Then the eyes appeared. Not ahead of us, not behind us. Directly under the bridge, between the broken stones, the unmistakable red glow flared to life. The eyes rose higher as the thing lifted its head. Its bulk scraped against the stonework, and for the first time, I saw more than an outline. Its fur was dark, coarse, clinging to its frame in thick clumps. Its head was broad, its snout long, its teeth exposed in a silent, grinding motion. Steam rose from its body where it touched the stone, leaving fresh scorch marks. Tom spoke barely above a whisper. "It waited for us." I felt my stomach twist. The creature had not been chasing us. It had driven us here. "We need to run the coach around it," Harris said. "Break through the brush." "That brush hides a ditch," I said. "We'd overturn." "Then what?" He barked. "We stay here and wait for it to climb out." Even as he said it, the creature's claws scraped at the stone ledge, gaining purchase. Its head rose higher through the broken railing. The air around us tightened. The horses reared again. One nearly toppled backward. Tom gripped the lantern with both hands. "John, listen. If the creature is climbing, the bridge won't hold. The stones are already cracking." He was right. The bridge shook under the weight beneath it. If it collapsed while we were on it, we would all be thrown into the ravine. I made the only choice left. "We drive across," I said. "Now." Tom stared at me. "The horses won't go. They will if we force them," I said. "And if we don't, that thing will reach the road." I snapped the reins hard. The horses balked, but then lurched forward as I drove them toward the bridge. Their bodies shook with fear, but instinct pushed them into motion. I yelled again, louder, and they surged ahead. The creature roared from below, a deep grinding bellow that shook the bridge so hard I felt it through the coach seat. Its claws scraped stone as it tried to pull itself up. The glow from its eyes brightened through the gap. "Go!" Harris shouted. The horses thundered onto the bridge. The wheels clattered across the stones, each rotation echoing against the hollow below. The bridge vibrated under the weight. Tom kept the lantern aimed downward at the gap. The creature's head reached the top of the railing. Its teeth snapped, its breath steamed. The stones beneath it cracked again. The horses lunged forward in a final, desperate burst, clearing the bridge's midpoint. The coach jolted violently as the rear wheel struck a loose stone. Harris nearly fell, but caught the rail with both hands. We reached the far side. The moment the wheels touched solid ground, the bridge gave a violent shudder. A deep crack echoed behind us. I didn't slow until we were several lengths away. Tom twisted around. The bridge. Look, I risked a glance. The creature stood atop the crumbling railing, its claws sinking into the stone. The bridge sagged beneath its massive weight. Then the central support broke. The entire middle section folded inward with a huge roar of collapsing stone. The Hellhound fell with it. Dust rose in a heavy wave. Chunks of stone tumbled into the ravine. But even as the debris settled, the glow of red eyes persisted through the dust. It was still alive. It was already climbing. Keep driving, Tom said. Do not stop until we see the lights of the inn. I didn't look back again. We fled toward Thistlebridge, the horses running as if the creatures still breathed on the back of their necks. The first lantern of Thistlebridge came into view across the dark fields. The faint yellow glow hung from a post outside the outer smithy, barely more than a pinprick at this distance, but the sight of it steadied me. I held the reins tight, coaxing what strength the horses had left. Their strides had grown uneven, their breaths harsh, but they kept running. Tom leaned forward as if his weight alone could push us faster. Harris stayed rigid on the rear step, eyes fixed on the road behind us. We passed the old stone markers near the edge of the village. A few houses sat scattered along the slope, windows dark at this hour, chimneys still. The narrow lane ahead would lead us into the main square where the inn and stable stood. If we made it that far, we could at least seek shelter behind solid walls. A faint clatter reached us from behind. Not from the ravine, not from the bridge, from the road. Tom stiffened. Tell me that's falling stone. It's footsteps, Harris said. His voice had lost all force. It's climbing the road. I try not to look back, but instinct won. Through the dark, I saw a shape far behind us, moving up the slope. Not running, not sprinting, just walking. Each step measured, each step heavy. The red eyes glowed through the dark, unwavering. The dust of the collapsed bridge still clung to its fur, drifting off its body in thin trails. The creature moved without strain, as if the fall had been nothing. The horses sensed it before the rest of us. They surged forward, nearly lifting the coach with them. The wheels clattered wildly. Tom held the lantern upright with both hands. We're close, he said. Just hold them steady. We entered the first cluster of houses. The narrow road between them amplified every sound. The horses' breaths echoed against the stone walls. The creature's distant steps thudded faintly behind us. A door creaked open. A man leaned out holding a candle. His eyes widened when he saw the speed of our coach. He shouted something, probably a warning or a question, but the wind drowned it out. Another window opened. A woman leaned out, clutching a shawl, startled by the noise. The village was waking to the sound of our flight. We reached the main square. The posting inn stood ahead, its lanterns lit for the late arrivals. A few stable boys sat near the posts, half asleep. They stood abruptly when they saw us barreling in. Clear the yard, I shouted. They scattered. The moment we rolled into the square, I pulled hard on the reins. The horses skidded, hooves scraping stone, and the coach lurched sideways before coming to a jarring stop. Tom dropped down from the box at once, lantern raised. Harris jumped off the rear step and turned toward the road, musket useless but held like a spear. The merchant inside shoved open the door and stumbled out, face flushed, breathing hard. The young woman followed, calm despite the panic around her. She stepped aside, cloak brushing the ground, and looked toward the road with sharp, cautious eyes. Inside, I said to them, "Both of you now." The merchant ran for the inn. The young woman hesitated a moment, then moved with measured steps toward the door. Tom's voice cut through the square. There! The creature entered the village. Its outline filled the narrow lane between the first houses, head lowered, shoulders wide, legs thick as timber posts. It walked with steady steps, steam rising from its fur. The ground beneath its paws blackened in fresh patches, glowing faintly before darkening again. Every house it passed fell silent. The entire village seemed to hold its breath. The creature stopped at the edge of the square. The red eyes stared directly at us. Harris lifted the musket as if it still carried powder. "Back inside the coach," he shouted. "Get to shelter." Tom grabbed my arm. "John, if it charges—" "It won't," I said, though I didn't know why I believed it. The creature took one step forward. The scorch mark beneath its paws spread outward. A faint crackling sound reached us. The air grew hotter, sharp enough to sting the nose. Villagers pressed against their windows, terrified. Stable boys hid behind the posts. The inn door swung open as the merchant and young woman watched from within. The creature exhaled once. The sound rumbled through the square. Then it stopped. Its eyes shifted, not toward us, but toward the road behind us. The northern road, the route that led deeper into the county, away from the village. It turned slowly, without rush or hesitation. It walked past the well, past the edge of the square, past the outer barns. Each step left a patch of scorched ground, but it never changed pace. It passed the last row of houses and continued into the fields beyond, heading north. We watched until the red glow of its eyes disappeared behind the hedgerow. Only when it was fully gone did anyone breathe again. Harris sagged to one knee. Tom lowered the lantern. I felt the reins slip slightly in my hand, my fingers numb with cold and strain. The villagers emerged slowly. Men with lanterns, women clutching coats, stable boys wide-eyed and trembling. They gathered around us in a loose circle, whispering questions none of us could answer. Someone asked what it was. Another asked where it went. A third wanted to know if it would return. I didn't speak until the crowd quieted. "It won't return tonight," I said. It was moving north. The postmaster elbowed his way through the villagers, red-faced, shouting, demanding to know why we had come in at such a speed and why the horses were foaming. Tom told him to hold his tongue until morning. No one argued. The merchant stumbled from the doorway of the inn and looked at me as if I had dragged him through hell. The young woman stepped out after him and met my eyes. She nodded once, not in gratitude, not in fear, but in recognition, as though she had expected something like this her whole life. The horses were led to the stables. Their legs shook, but they were alive. We entered the inn together, Harris limping slightly, Tom with one hand still gripping the lantern as if afraid to let it go. The villagers followed, filling the room with low voices. Within minutes, the tale had already begun to change in their mouths, growing longer, darker, more embellished. I let them talk. I had no interest in shaping their stories. When the innkeeper asked me what I thought the creature was, I answered simply, "I don't know," I said. "But it burns the earth, and it was here." That night, I didn't sleep. Neither did Tom. Harris dozed against the wall for a few minutes at a time, but woke at every sound. The young woman stayed near the fire, eyes fixed on the door. The merchant locked himself in his room and refused to come out for breakfast. By dawn, the scorched path through the village was all anyone spoke of. Word spread fast. Men from nearby farms came to see it. Some called it a sign. Some called it a curse. Some said we imagined it all. But the earth held the truth. By afternoon, riders were dispatched to nearby towns to warn them. Others followed the scorched trail north. They did not go far. The trail ended abruptly in a patch of dried, blackened soil. No tracks continued beyond it. No scent, no marks on the trees. The creature had vanished. If you ever pass through Thistlebridge, you will still hear it told. How in 1841, the first Hellhound walked into the village and left its mark on the coach road. Some men question it, others swear by it. But the earth keeps the record. And those who drove that night never question what we saw. Content is user-generated and unverified.